in these quotations. And by the way, as we'll see here in a few moments, he uses Psalm 34 all the way through this letter. It's one of his main texts that he continually goes back to. So first, I want to try to help us understand why he is using Psalm 34. Secondly, I want us to help us understand the significance of Psalm 34 and its quotation in this passage. And then finally, I want to help us to form a biblical way of looking at these passages where the Old Testament is quoted in the New Testament, and hopefully form a proper way of thinking interpretively or interpreting what the New Testament is really saying, what it's trying to get us to think and to see. So it's either going to be something that we're going to learn something, or it's going to be a total bomb. I'm just going to tell you up front. I really struggled with this as I was preparing this message, whether to go this direction. But I hope in the end that you'll appreciate what it is I'm trying to help us to see and understand it. And let me say, people, one of the reasons that I feel like this is necessary is because as I look around today in the church in general in America, I see a dearth in the way and the lack of understanding that people have concerning how the New Testament quotes and uses the Old Testament texts. And because of that, we are missing so much of the truth that is there for us. And we're applying it to people and groups and things that it was never intended to apply to. And we're failing to apply it to us, the ones to whom it was intended to apply. So I hope we can transform our thinking, our way of looking at these passages, and not only benefit from this passage, but benefit from all the other New Testament passages. And in turn, I think see a much grander and greater picture overall of the sovereign work of God in His people. So I think it has very important implications for us if we can learn some of these principles. And by the way, the interesting thing about all this is these principles aren't new. They've been with us from the very foundation of the church. It's just sadly they've been lost in about the last 150 years. We misplaced them. Somewhat akin to the children of Israel losing the Scripture, so to speak, back in the Old Testament. And the priests finding it hidden away in the temple and saying, "What is this?" So many times today, because we have been led astray in the way we think about the church and the people of God, we've lost sight of so much of the biblical truth that God has laid down for us as the people of God. So I hope we can regain some of that and transform our thinking a little bit to think, I believe, much more biblically about these texts. So first, I want us to look at the issue of Peter's use of Psalm 34, the Psalm 34 quotation. We're going to look at it in general in the letter of 1 Peter, and then also specifically in 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 10 through 12. As I said a moment ago, it's very evident that Psalm 34 is one of Peter's favorite passages in the Old Testament when it comes to him writing the book of 1 Peter. In fact, you might be interested to know that Peter quotes or alludes to Psalm 34 10 times in this letter. And not only does he quote or allude to it 10 times, but he does it in the first 3 chapters of the book. After he gets past chapter 3, he moves on to other subjects. So in the first 3 chapters alone, he goes back or alludes to Psalm 34 some 10 times. There is something about Psalm 34 that has captured Peter's attention. There's something that he is trying to teach us that if we don't do a little digging, we're going to miss. We're going to fail to understand. Now, just so that you don't get confused, I hope I don't confuse anyone with this. Our Psalm 34 in the Septuagint, the Greek version of the Old Testament that was translated from the Hebrew back several hundred years before the coming of Christ, back actually during that intertestamental period, it would have been Psalm 33. Okay? So our Psalm 34 would have been their Psalm 33. So kind of keep that in mind as I put some of these verses up here, that it doesn't throw you off from time to time in some of the things I say. So the Septuagint version would have been Psalm 33. And in the Hebrew rabbinical teaching concerning Psalm 34 or Psalm 33, depending on how you look at it, it was considered to be a key passage in the Old Testament concerning righteous living and spiritual ethics. Now keep that in mind. If you were to consult a rabbi concerning Psalm 34, he would tell you that it was one of the main Old Testament passages that the rabbis would use in instructing the children of Israel on the issues of righteousness and on the ethics of living. You remember we discussed this a little bit last week when we were talking about the fact that Peter is in verses 8 and 9, he's teaching these people that he's writing to, he's telling them this is how a kingdom child lives. He's giving them ethics, kingdom ethics, eternal kingdom ethics. And we need to see that as he begins quoting now Psalm 34, he is actually showing us that these eternal kingdom ethics are not something new. They are something that God has already stated. He stated them back there in Psalm 34. And He stated them to the children of Israel, and it was already understood that this psalm was a psalm that taught people proper righteousness and ethics of living, how to conduct themselves with other people. Both people within their kingdom, or the Jewish nation, and people without. Now Harry didn't read the superscript at the beginning of Psalm 34. But, and I'm not faulting Harry, by the way, you know. But the superscript, if you go back and look at what in the world was that? When you go back, and some of the noises she makes sometimes are just, it's hilarious. But if you go back and look at the superscript, you'll see that this psalm was written by David after he had faked insanity and escaped the clutches of Abimelech, who was the king of the Philistines. Now, the term Abimelech actually is both a proper name and a title. Abimelech literally means father is king, and it was a title used by the kings of the Philistines that basically showed that they were descended from the original king or the high king of the Philistines. It was a title somewhat like we would use when we talked about the pharaohs of Egypt. Abimelech could be a person's proper name, or it could also be a title just designating him as a king. Because if you go back to the 1 Samuel passage that tells the story about David and what happened there, you're going to find out that the Old Testament, the 1 Samuel passage doesn't call him Abimelech. It calls him by another name. In fact, there's been some people that say, you see there's an error in the Bible. No, as long as you understand that the name used in 1 Samuel was his proper name, Abimelech was his title. It's really simple, a lot of these things, when you get back to them and just look at them and use some common sense. But David wrote this psalm after he had faked madness, and basically Abimelech, the king of the Philistines, said, why did y'all bring me this madman into my court? I mean, literally, if you go back and read the account in 1 Samuel, it says that David was scribbling all over the wall and drooling all over himself when they brought him before the king. And the king looked and said, "Get this crazy man out of my sight. He's probably got some kind of disease." He didn't even recognize him as David. And yet, the servants that had first found him said, "Aren't you the one that it is said that Saul